This video's topic is something that many gamers have a natural distaste for: randomness. Most people believe that randomness is antithesis to skill, and generally just allows people to achieve a positive result without actually earning it. Of course, in many cases, the randomness in games have been placed there for specific reasons by the designers. So today we're going to explore some of the reasons why randomness is utilized in games, even if it makes us mad from time to time. A common complaint about random factors is that they let players be lucky. This type of randomness tends to be one where the outcome is mostly or completely dependent on the random factor, and players have very little control over it. Fundamentally, this means that player choice and therefore skill is not as important. How does randomness do this? At the most extreme level, we're talking about dice rolling games where you simply do whatever the die says and the choice is virtually eliminated. When choice is eliminated, skill is also eliminated. So why would a designer want to do this? Well, to answer that question, we should think about the types of games that usually feature this kind of randomness. And if you make a list for yourself, you will find that the majority of these games are either designed for children or very casual in nature. In these type of games, winning itself isn't all that important, or perhaps you want to ensure that players have roughly equal chances to win, and randomness is an easy way to achieve that. De-emphasizing skill and at the same time promoting some of the other things we'll talk about later in this video. Of course, for most of us, games like Story and Go Fish aren't really the kind of games we're so interested in, are they? Another aspect of randomness is that it offers elements of surprise and delight. These are terms that game designers will use to describe pivotal moments of gameplay, moments that the player will remember above others. There are, of course, various ways to introduce the elements, but randomness is one of the most common ways to do this. One of the more obvious examples is the loot drops from MMORPGs. After what can be an exhausting battle with a raid boss, you feel exhilarated, but wait, it's not over yet. Now you get to find out what loot it dropped, and that situation is often quite exciting, particularly if your party or guild had previously not killed that boss before and you're unsure of what the loot might be. And it would not be nearly as exciting to see a particular item drop if instead of it being randomized, the same thing dropped every single time. A more subtle example of this is critical hits. I'm sure I'm not the only one who loves these sort of things. I mean, who doesn't like big numbers, right? Even in cases where I'm unsure of the numerical trade-off of raw damage versus critical hit, I'm probably going to lean towards building towards crit as a default position. Yeah, I'm going to be weaker on most of my attacks, but when the crit roll happens, it's all worth it. This, of course, is also a part of the appeal of gambling, and many games, particularly in the mobile and social space, have taken advantage of this propensity in people to like to gamble, even when the games themselves are not actually about gambling. But that's another topic for another video. So why do some games have great replayability, and why do we keep playing them again and again, despite having mastered a lot of the mechanics behind them? Well, one way is to utilize randomness, which accomplishes this in two major ways. The first is by changing the initial conditions of the game, even in cases where other things stay the same. For example, in games like Civ with random map generation, we're presented with different challenges based on the layout of the map and the differences in the other civilization's strengths and weaknesses, even if you choose to play the same civilization yourself. The second is by changing conditions during play. This can be random events that players must react to, or a random loot system that provides some sort of non-linear progression. Roguelikes is a genre that typically offers a lot of initial choices and then combines it with randomness during play. The combination of what the player chooses and what the game serves up provides for very dynamic and unpredictable results, allowing players to go through the same mechanical motions while achieving a fresh experience. Contrast this to games with predefined levels and challenges, many older platformers and that kind of thing. And in those cases, even if the game chooses to offer you a different character, many of the choices you make will end up being the same, and replayability will suffer. Randomness facilitating replayability is often an important part of single-player games, but generally much less so for multiplayer games. Multiplayer games substitute the unpredictability of human behavior for programmatic randomness, which is why many people prefer human opponents even if they are largely anonymous. Imagine a hypothetical game where you have all the information and all options are always available to you. You would simply do the calculations and choose the best option every time. That doesn't sound like very much fun, does it? In these cases, randomness can help create more meaningful choices in a couple ways. The first is by limiting choices. In card games like Magic the Gathering, you don't have all the tools at your disposal. Instead, you have to weigh the choices you do have against their benefits, as well as consider what future draws you might have and what randomness might have conferred upon your opponent. In addition, the randomness of what your opponent might be playing, given the large card pool, also factors into this as well. This also means that by limiting choices or introducing some variability in a game state, you can actually create more varied choices when you consider situations on an aggregate level. A card or choice that isn't valid or good in one scenario may end up being very good in another. The second way randomness can introduce more choices is by providing variability in the outcomes. For example, a weapon or skill that deals a variable amount of damage or has a small percentage chance of inflicting a status effect will, with its output, provide the player a varying set of inputs for future decisions. So we can see that randomness offers a host of potential benefits, and frankly, randomness is part of most games, whether you recognize it as such or not. Deciding how much randomness and what kinds of randomness to introduce is, of course, the real debate. And the reality is that it depends on what factors such as target demographic and your design goals are for your product. I hope this was interesting, and if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, be sure to post them.